Hello, everybody. Thanks for coming out tonight. This is TK Kugler from Wasabi Ventures Stables. This is our webinar that we're hosting. And tonight we have a special guest, George Adams from Housatonic Bloodstock is going to talk a little bit about auctions and aspects of that and conformation and probably all kinds of other fun stuff to go along with that. But just a couple housekeeping pieces. It is being recorded. So for those of you out there in TV land who are not currently tuned in, this will show up on YouTube, on our YouTube channel in a day or two. So that's one housekeeping thing. Second thing is if you have questions at all at any point tonight, if you scroll down inside of Zoom, there's a little chat window. And if you click the chat button, you can ask a question at any point. I'll sort of collect the questions and ask them for you of George at opportune times. But you can ask those at any point, and I'll work them in and sort of be the best I can of being Oprah here. And once again, everybody else is on mute. So if you're screaming kids in the background, sirens, your house catches on fire, all of that, none of that will be captured. You're completely safe. So without further ado, I'm going to hand everything over to George and let him start talking tonight. So thanks for coming, George.
Thank you for having me. Excited to be back. Hopefully this is helpful for people, although I'm going to guess it might end up raising more questions than answering them, just because a lot of this is very subjective stuff. I'm going to start talking about conformation first, and the auction aspect of it is sort of straightforward. It's mostly all of the conformation issues, problems, the little things that I'll point out, none of them are disqualifying per se. I mean, there are good horses with all of these things. What it does is it goes to value. So it's if a horse has certain things, it's going to knock down the value that TK or another owner is willing to pay for one of these horses because of the impact that it might have on their racing career. So let me make sure I can get this set here, and we're going to start with can you all see? Is it showing up, TK, the screen with Justify, picture of Justify?
Yes, sir. Looking at Justify as we speak.
Great. Okay. Sorry, it doesn't show that. Anyway, all right. So that is a picture of Justify, who by all accounts is an absolutely amazing physical specimen. He won the Triple Crown, not necessarily because he's an amazing physical specimen, because they were before my time, but Seattle Slew wasn't supposedly an amazing physical specimen. Assault back in the day was not an amazing physical specimen. But having said that, Justify is sort of what everybody would like to buy when they go to an auction, or what they would like to breed if they're breeding their own horses. When you look at a horse or hear people talk about horses, the first thing that people usually talk about with good horses is their balance. They say that the horse is very well balanced. So what that means is, if you sort of look at this picture of Justify, you can see the slope of his shoulder in the front is pretty similar to the slope of his hindquarters and back. He's as well muscled through his shoulder as he is through his hindquarters. The height of his withers is the same height as the point of his hip there in the back. He's the length of his back, sort of from his chest all the way to his hindquarters, matches nicely with his height, with the length of his legs. I didn't think I should have put a picture of Waveland up here, or campaign vows of two of our mares who were both a little bit sort of short-legged. So they're not as well balanced as examples as Justify, because they're, you sort of look at them and think their legs should be just a tad bit longer. But Justify is a very well-balanced horse. Front end matches the back end. The length of his legs matches the length of his back. He's got a nice long neck. He's about perfect. From the side, he does turn out a little bit in one knee. And the reason Justify only brought $500,000 at auction, even though people sort of acknowledged that he was this good looking as he was as a yearling, he had a surgery to remove OCDs and a stifle before he was sold as a yearling. And that apparently put the Coolmore vets off of him. But he sold still, despite having this thing that meant Coolmore wasn't going to bid on him, still brought $500,000 from WinStar and still won the Triple Crown. So that's sort of what I was talking about a minute ago. None of these issues that you might notice in a sales horse are ever disqualifying. It just goes to value. Another example of a pretty good-looking horse is American Pharoah. Another very well-balanced horse. The one knock that I would have on him, his neck might be a little short for his body. But if you take that out for a second, again, slope of his shoulder matches the slope of his hindquarters, his hip. His front end is as well developed as his hind end. He's a little bit stretched out in this photo in front, makes his hip look a little bit higher than his shoulder there, but I promise you in person, he is not like that. The length of his back corresponds to the length of his legs. Except for maybe a tad short-necked, he's another very well-balanced horse. The one thing Bob Baffert always talked about with him was how efficient his stride was. It was very easy to see with Justify. Justify had a very long stride, and you could sort of see as you were watching. It never looked like he was going that fast because he was sort of loping. American Pharoah was a little bit different in that he did have a long stride, but it was very efficient. No wasted motion. Everything went exactly where it was supposed to be, which obviously you can't convey in a picture, but it'd be a result of his conformation and his balance. He's a very correct horse. If you stood in front of him, his legs are straight. Everything on him is where it should be, except for maybe his neck could be a little bit longer. This is Vekoma, the horse that won the Bluegrass this year as a yearling. You look at this picture, another very well-balanced horse. It's a little bit different with yearlings. You can see his hip is a little bit higher than his shoulder. That's a growth thing. Yearlings go through little growth spurts and they don't all grow at the same time. But all of the pieces are there. He's got a nice straight hind leg. The interesting thing about Vekoma, and I'm using him as an example, is because anybody who watched the Bluegrass, his action on his front end, he paddles worse than most nickel claimers do. His front legs sort of don't go straight ahead and then back as he runs. They go winging way out to the side. You would never have guessed that looking at this horse as a yearling, not just from this side photo where everything looks nice, but even if you sort of walked around him and looked in front, he is a little bit offset in his knees, but I went back and looked at my notes when he won the Bluegrass to see what I had thought of him as a yearling. My notes were offset in his knees, but nice walk. So nothing that would indicate that his stride would be that way, and his connections have said the same thing. To see him walk, to see him jog, he doesn't have that action. It's only racing, and it obviously didn't prevent him from winning one of the biggest Kentucky Derby preps. Having said that, if you knew that was the horse's action, you're probably not going to pay as much for that horse or be as interested in that horse as you would in a horse who's got more orthodox action. I use the term offset to describe Vekoma's knees. I don't have a front end picture of him. This is a mare named Winning Bet. And so her knees, I assume everybody knows the knees are those joints in the middle of her front legs there, the sort of bulbous, the bulbous joints in the middle of her front legs. Above that would be her forearm. Below that is the cannon bone down to the ankle, then the pastern and the hoof going sort of down. So when we say offset knees, what that means is where her forearm goes into her knee does not line up exactly with where the cannon bone comes out at the bottom. Typically what you'll see a lot of times is the cannon bone will be sort of further out towards the outside of the knee than where the forearm goes into the knee at the top. That's typically what we mean by offset. You don't always see it. This mare is a bit offset in both, not terribly so, a little bit more in her left or right looking at it. A lot of times you don't necessarily see a horse is not offset to the same degree in both knees. Sometimes they're only offset in one. Sometimes they're a tad offset in both. Offset knees are, everybody sort of attributes them now to Stormcat. Stormcat was notoriously offset in his knees. He passed that trait on. People stopped being put off by it because the Stormcats ran despite the fact that they had these offset knees. The reason that offset knees are a conformational flaw is when a horse is running and they put all of their weight on each one of those front legs in turn, and when the cannon bones don't line up underneath the knees like that, it stresses the joints in a way that is not ideal.
George, I had a question for you. You're showing a mare at this point.
Yes.
If we were at an auction and the mare being offset in her knees like this mare is, are you thinking that is a passed on hereditary trait for the mares to pass on to foals, or not so much?
It can be. It's one of those, they're not, it's not as easy as a Mendelian traits where it's the little Punnett squares. It's not, offset is a dominant trait and you're either offset or you're not, and it's not like color of a horse where you can do a little Punnett square and figure out the chances that you're going to get an offset baby. This mare is not terribly offset. She's also a little bit older. She's 15, 12, 13, something like that. So a lot of times as these horses get older, their conformational flaws become more pronounced. Mm-hmm. So she might have been less offset younger, but typically this degree of offsetness, I did buy this mare. It would not be a pass. There are mares who are offset enough that you just say, you know what, the chances that this mare being as crooked as she is gives even if you bred her to American Pharoah, who has the most perfect knees you'll ever see, the chances that you're going to get a correct baby out of that are just not, she's just so terribly offset. I wouldn't be comfortable thinking that she's going to produce a baby with remotely correct knees. Mm-hmm. A mare like this, those knees aren't terrible. I wouldn't want to breed her to a stallion that had offset knees. You wouldn't want to double up on that, or you wouldn't want to breed her to a stallion that's known for having offset knees. You'd try and breed to a pretty correct stallion, which a lot of times most stallions are pretty correct. Otherwise they wouldn't have sort of made the cut. Yeah. And when they do have those slight faults, it's people avoid breeding to them. People that are trying to sell the babies avoid breeding to them because they don't want to take the chance that the stallion is going to pass that on. And there's enough stallions out there who are correct enough that you can find a mate for her that will give you, let you think that you're not going to get a baby who's too offset. And having said that, you can breed two parents that have totally straight legs and get a crooked baby. There's, it's not, again, that's the fun of all of this. You can best laid plans, can still go awry. But again, this mare would sell for slightly less than, what she might if she was 100% correct. I mean, once upon a time, she brought $300,000 when she was pregnant for the first time. I bought her 8 years later for $25,000 in full with a $25,000 stud fee. Wasn't necessarily her conformation as much as the fact that her foals, some of which had sold well, hadn't run as well as people would have liked. So again, it all goes into the mix and goes to value. And with mares, these conformational faults, when you're buying a brood mare, they're less problematic than if you find them in a racing prospect. Because again, you're hoping that you're going to breed away from whatever faults they might have, whatever flaws there are. You're hoping you're going to breed a baby that isn't going to have those flaws or not going to have those flaws to the same degree. Whereas when you're going out buying a racing prospect, you have to live with whatever flaw they have. They have that flaw, and you have to sort of project what they're going to do with that flaw on the racetrack. So it's a little bit of a different analysis. All right, so talking about knees, this is offset knees, where when looking from the front, the cannon bones don't line up underneath the forearm. This horse, this is Into Mischief, one of the top handful of stallions in Kentucky, now stands for $150,000. Into Mischief is incredibly over at the knee. If you look at his front end, his front leg is not straight. His forearm down to his knee, and then the cannon bone goes back at an angle from his knee. That trait is called over at the knee. He tends to pass that along with some offset knees, but much like Stormcat, it doesn't seem to matter. They run through it, and people now will pay for it even if they have that trait. Over at the knee, like that, is a flaw that doesn't really bother people that much. His is pretty pronounced. Bayern is another horse that is over at the knee. He managed to win the Breeders' Cup Classic and some other good races, and is a stallion in Kentucky now with his first 2-year-olds this year, and plenty of people are breeding to him. So over at the knee isn't that big a deal to people, generally speaking. The converse to over at the knee is back at the knee. You'll see this horse where the forearm goes down to the knee, and then the cannon bone goes forward so that the horse's ankle is in front of his knee. So if you drew a line from the top of his forearm down to his ankle, that straight line would be in front of his knee joint. And it's pretty pronounced in this picture on this horse. This is called back at the knee again, and this is typically considered a fairly serious conformational flaw, especially to the degree that this horse has it. But then again, this horse brought $900,000 at the OBS March sale and topped the session. He's by Medaglia d'Oro out of Rashna. And even in the write-up, the Blood Horse and the TDN write-ups talking about the sale, the trainer, which I think John Service is the one who's going to get him, he even comments on the horse being a little bit back at the knee, which this horse is a lot back at the knee. They still paid $900,000 for him and think he's worth that, and he breezed fine. So that's one of the things about 2-year-old sales that are a little different. If you saw this horse as a yearling, if TK was looking at this horse for his pinhooking partnership, this is a horse you'd stay away from because he's back at the knee. Typically turns people off unless they have an amazing breeze like this horse did, and you get somebody sort of crazy into pay for it. The reason that back at the knee is an issue, this is a totally different horse, but we're looking at the chestnut in the foreground, and you see his front leg that's on the ground. Every horse does this on both of their legs however many times during a race, every stride, and you see the amount of torque that's on that front or on that knee, his left knee, where he's planted his hoof on the ground. All of the weight of his body at 30 plus miles an hour is on that knee, and that knee joint is behind his ankle, behind the line from his shoulder to his ankle. When a horse is back at the knee to begin with, and then this is what their stride looks like normally, just imagine how much worse it would look if the horse was back at the knee to start. So that's why people avoid back at the knee. The amount of stress that it puts on the knee and the amount of damage that it conceivably could do to the knee joint when the horse is at full speed. And this horse isn't even breezing in this picture, and that's what it looks like. Again, so this is what the Medaglia d'Oro, this guy, that's what he would look even worse than that, or more pronounced than that, his back at the knee when he's doing that. And they paid $900,000 for him. And, I sort of shocked, because the chances that this horse withstands enough training and racing to be worth that amount of money seems fairly unlikely. I don't know. I wouldn't have bet $900,000 on it. But I'm not as smart as, maybe I'm as smart as John Service, but I'm not nearly as accomplished. So. Another horse this is Dane Hill. Dane Hill is the all-time leading worldwide sire of stakes winners, 380-ish, I think, between Europe and Australia. He's also back at the knee, not quite as pronounced as that Medaglia d'Oro 2-year-old, but noticeable enough. Everybody knew it about him. He passed that on, and he still sired 380 stakes winners until Galileo passes him here in the not too distant future. He, has been the all-time leading sire of stakes winners. So it's not disqualifying. It doesn't mean the horse isn't going to be able to run if he's back at the knee. It does not mean he's not going to be able to win stakes races. But when you're picking a horse out at auction, it's something to note, and it certainly should factor into your valuation of the horse and what you're willing to pay for the horse.
Hey, George?
Yes.
I'm going to jump in because we got a question.
Sure.
And the question I'm actually going to answer and then dovetail it into you. It comes from Lauren. I'm really interested to hear how you start narrowing down the list of 2-year-olds to look at for the FT sale, the Fasig-Tipton sale that's coming. Do you look at workouts first, pedigrees first? Do you exclude certain pedigrees outright? Do you exclude times less than 10.1? Lauren, so I'll start the answer there for you. You have to understand that it starts actually with the owner, the person who's actually going to wind up paying the bills. So what most smart owners do, and Dan knows I'm really smart. What most smart owners do is they start with their team and they say, okay, listen, team, this is what I'm targeting at this auction. I'm looking at only fillies in this specific price range, and I'm only looking at fillies in this price range with these certain sort of pedigree traits. And then I have a second tier where I'm looking at fillies, or colts, geldings, but it'll be a different price range and a different pedigree, and so that's where programs. Yeah, that's where it starts. That's because if you got a book, grab a book real quick, you have a book that looks like this, and it's got hundreds and hundreds of horses available. So the first narrowing down for smart owners, and once again, I joke about, I'm smart, but I think most owners that I know that I would consider respectable in this business have some kind of target that they're looking for. And then the narrowing begins, because if my price range is, we'll just say my price range is a max of a bid of $50,000. Well, I know that I'm not going to get something that is probably from, I'm not going to get that Into Mischief as a great example. and the reason being is, yes, there may be an Into Mischief that sells for $50,000, but I'm not going to want it because it's going to have some kind of vetting problem. It's going to have a conformational problem that is so bad that no one will touch it because the stud fee alone is higher than the bid that I want to go to as a max. So that's how the narrowing begins. It all begins with the customer, and the customer in this case is the owner who's going to pay the bills. The other narrowing that happens that is along the same lines that happens before anything else really even get close to the auction is that you may the team, or at least, and I'll talk about our team, but I know others do this too. Our team will talk and say, well, are you okay with the price range that you're shooting at and the things that you're looking at? Are you okay with young, unproven mares that this may be their first or second foal? And I might say, yes, I can live with that, because there's not a proven track record with that mare. In other cases, I may say no, so that's sort of the narrowing. And once again, I'll talk about it in our case for Fasig-Tipton, that's happening starting next week. We probably eliminate 80% of the horses before we even begin from a target standpoint. Because of the criteria that I'll set on what we're looking at. So it narrows it down pretty quickly from that perspective. So hopefully that gives you some idea, Lauren. George, I'll flip it over to you if there's anything you'd want to add beyond what I just said. But
no, I think that's absolutely the way that most people would attack it. I mean, you just can't physically look at 600 workouts, 600 pages, catalog pages, 600 physicals, and, sort of think that you might actually buy any single one of those. It's just, it's a sort of a silly way to go about it. Even if you don't have the sort of strict criteria that, even if you're not looking for only Maryland bred fillies in a, relatively narrow price range, you're going to only be looking for, classic colts in a much higher price range. But even that is going to limit you to a smaller portion of the catalog. And I would say most people are fairly good about sticking to those criteria. What you'll run into sometimes is you might be out at the sale and you have your criteria, and a consignor or another agent that will say, hey, you need to go check out this horse at so-and-so's consignment. And you depending on who the person is and how much you like them and trust them, you go look at that horse, and if the horse might make sense even though it didn't meet those criteria, and you go and have a conversation with your owner. But it's not like most people are going and actually looking at all 600 of those horses as possible prospects.
George, I'll jump in for those that are in the stables that are online. A horse that came to us somewhat in that fashion was Golden Spun Lad, who we have now as a 2-year-old. We were looking very specifically for horses that we were pinhooking at the time. And Golden Spun Lad had some physical things that were going to limit it from being able to be pinhooked. It had some vet issues that were going to take more time, and the window was going to be longer. But we were able to get Golden Spun Lad as a yearling at a price point that we probably wouldn't have got him if he was good, if he had vetted perfectly. And so that was one of those cases where I called an audible on the fly and said, okay, we're gonna buy this horse and race it. we know we're going to have to give it more time, and and looks like it's going to pay out for us, hopefully. And, he'll be at the track in 2 weeks and hopefully in a race before, the falls hits. So sometimes, to George's point, I'm probably a little more disciplined than you might find in some other owners that I know. I go with a plan and I try to stick with the plan. But even sometimes when you do that, you have to call an audible because something comes across that you find an opportunity that you just can't let go. But I try to stick to the plan so that we don't end up with 42 horses when I only wanted 4. So anyway, George, thanks for jumping in that question. I'll let you get back to your regular scheduled programming.
Yeah, no, that is part of the program. So let's see. All right, back to Conformation. This now is Quality Road. I think right now he's technically the leading sire in the country. Certainly the youngest of the leading sires. Had 5 Grade 1 winners last year, I think. Had the favorite in the Oaks. Had Roadster in the Derby. Quality Road, you can see in this picture, his back is a bit too long for his body, and he's a bit sway backed. So there's a dip in his back behind his shoulder, and before it goes back up to his hindquarters there. That's called sway backed. It's more of a aesthetically unpleasing thing than technically it's a conformational flaw. It is not something with a racehorse that's going to be terribly problematic for him. And obviously it wasn't his case, since he set track records at like 6.5 furlongs, a mile and 1.125 miles. Again, he's now one of the best stallions in the country, and he passes this trait on. This is Blofeld, who's a stallion in Maryland. We're going to have a Blofeld foal with one of the Wasabi mares, hopefully in a couple of weeks. Bred 2 mares to him for next year. He's also a bit sway-backed there. Maybe not quite as long-backed as Quality Road, but does have that sway back. So Quality Road passes it on. This is Roadster as a yearling. And see, he's another long-backed, bit sway-backed. This is Roadster as a foal, and he had, you could sort of see the start of the long back and the sway back even as a foal. Excuse me. I bring these up to sort of show that, a lot of these traits are heritable. Excuse me. They are heritable, but it's still a kind of a crapshoot. Excuse me, you don't necessarily know, even if the stallion has a bit of a sway back, there's no guarantee that your foal is going to get it. Or even if you breed a mare that is not sway back to that sway back stallion, there's no guarantee that you're going to get a not sway backed foal. I already mentioned Into Mischief tends to get foals that are over at the knee. Dane Hill got foals that were back at the knee. Some of them are heritable. All the traits are heritable to some degree. It's just a question of do they run anyway, and how bad is it? One more Quality Road. This is Isabella Fina as a yearling, and you see she's not really sway-backed or as long-backed as those other 3 were. This is, again, her hip is a little bit higher than her shoulder there, but it's more of a growth spurt issue rather than a sway back. Sort of see just looking at it. She was the favorite for the Oaks, so whether she had a sway back or not, she's obviously quite talented and fast. And they paid $800,000 for her as a 2-year-old. Roadster they paid $500-something thousand for as a yearling. So it all goes to value more than being disqualifying. And excuse me 1 second, and we're just going to switch. Oh, sorry. Do this and this. All right. And we now have another yearling on the screen? Yes. Okay. This horse I am showing, this is a new or a different trait now that I would like to know. Here we go. All right. Weanling. This weanling, it's just a random weanling. It's not anybody special, but this weanling is very upright in his pasterns. Pasterns are it's the area from the horse's ankle to his hoof. I'll go to the next one here just to, this horse is very upright. You see the angle is not as low as you would like it. That left front especially, and his two hind ones are quite upright. You like to see a little bit more angle in the pasterns because when the horse is running, those pasterns are like the springs. When the hoof hits the ground, those pasterns flex and almost to the ground. Some horses do hit the ground, and they wear little pads on their pasterns to keep them from getting rug burn effectively. When a horse is too upright in their pasterns, again, it's like the being back at the knee. The amount of torque that is placed on that joint, if they're not flexing as far as they need to, it has the potential to cause injuries in the horse down the road, whether it's chips or something else. So this is a horse that's upright in his pasterns, and those pasterns are probably a little bit long also, although full pasterns tend to look longer and they kind of grow into them. This horse is soft in his pasterns, especially the hind ones if you look there, but you can see it in that left front also. This is a Fleet Alex. So he won 2/3 of the Triple Crown, was an Eclipse champion, has sired some fairly decent horses. But he is very, very, you could call that low in the pasterns or soft in the pasterns, is the term that you'll hear people use. He came by this honestly. A Fleet Alex is by Northern Fleet, who was even softer in his pasterns than a Fleet Alex. And this is a trait that a Fleet Alex tends to pass on, which is one of the reasons why he sort of never made it as a commercial sire. Another stallion who's soft in his pasterns is Looking at Lucky, who sired the controversial Derby winner by disqualification this past weekend. Again, you can see in those hind legs that from his ankle joint to his hoof, there's not much of an angle there. You can see it in the front as well, not quite as pronounced. That's why he didn't bring very much money as a yearling, and it was only as a 2-year-old that he sold pretty well to Bob Baffert as a 2-year-old. But as we saw with that Medaglia d'Oro colt earlier, if the horse can sort of run through its issues, people are willing to overlook these things. Go back to this colt. This is the $3.65 million Curlin 2-year-old from the Gulfstream sale this year that Coolmore paid that outrageous amount of money for. This was him as a yearling. And if you look at his front pasterns, those are very long, very soft pasterns for a $3.65 million horse. And if you read some of the articles after the 2-year-old sale, John Sakura, who bred the horse, the guy from Hillendale, he mentioned they scratched him from the September sale because he was soft in his pasterns and, needed to do some growing up. He's also kind of chubby in this photo and sort of just doesn't look the part yet. He clearly grew out of that. I looked for and did not see a Conformation type photo of this horse after the 2-year-old sale on any of their write-ups. The closest thing you can find is in the sales ring. Leads me to believe he's probably still pretty soft in those pasterns. But by all accounts, his breeze was pretty amazing. He certainly did it in quick time, especially for as classic a pedigree as he had. So it's something that the ownership was willing to overlook and pay an outrageous amount of money for him, despite a conformational flaw.
George, I wanted to sort of extend something that you said. Once again, I'm going to give a perspective of somebody who's paying the bills. Is that not everybody cares about the same things. And what I mean by that is that I have been with other owners who are experienced buyers, and certain conformational traits or movement traits will instantly disqualify horses for them, or they will instantly overlook certain flaws. So it's not that this isn't an exact science, because not everyone agrees 100% about the things that are important, because not everyone has the exact same goals that they're shooting for either.
Or I would say also not the exact same experiences either. Somebody may have once had a horse that was soft in the Pasterns and had a terrible experience, and the horse was nothing but vet problems, and ended up not being able to run a lick, and so that will put them off. Vets are sort of the same way. When you get to a sale and have send your vet to the repository to look at the x-rays, some vets will see, you could have two vets would look at the same x-rays, and one of them will say, that doesn't bother me. I've seen half a dozen horses with this, and it never bothered any of them. And you get the other guy say, I can't pass this horse for you because, I've had 3 other horses that I looked at with this, and none of them amounted to anything. So it's all about personal experience, not all, but a lot of it's personal experience also. What people can live with and what they can't.
And, for example, you may have, I'll speak about us personally. We're a little more patient with 2-year-olds that we may buy than some other people may be. We may buy a 2-year-old knowing that it may take 3 more months longer than somebody else wants to be patient to have that horse run. And, so once again, you have to go in as an owner and think, this is my plan. And because of that, I may be able to find a horse that's a little less expensive and I know I'm going to have to give it more time, but I'm going to get something better in the long term, where there are owners who say, if I can't get a 2-year-old to run as a 2-year-old, I don't want it in any form. So it's not all, everybody's got a goal. So you got to have the goals and the budget to match what you're looking for.
Yeah. Budget isn't very important with all of this also. You can't, if your budget's only $20,000 at a 2-year-old sale, you can't find a horse with perfect conformation and, a very good pedigree for that. You're going to have to overlook, you're going to be missing something on the pedigree side, and probably have to overlook something or be able to live with something that other people won't, in order to, find something in that range, depending on what you're trying to do. Also, 2-year-old sales are harder to sort of find deals like that. Yearling sales, the horses still change a lot from the time they're a yearling to the time they're ready to race. You can have a horse with a bunch of vet issues as a yearling that, if all of those things go well, the horse could be perfect as a 2-year-old, but the chances of it going perfect are slim. And depending on your budget, some people would be willing to take that chance. All right. Looking at Lucky again. So soft on the Pasterns. You also, if you look at his left front foot there, he's pretty, what we would call clubby, in that foot. So he's soft in the Pasterns, but then the front of his left front hoof there, is pretty upright. You can, if you look at the other 3 feet, doesn't have the same angle at the front of his hoof on that left front as he does on the other 3. I tried to find this yearling. Again, his left front, if you look, is a bit clubby there. He's also a bit more upright through that left front pastern, going into the clubby foot. But again, this is not necessarily a disqualifying thing, but horses with clubby feet, can have issues with those feet, and it can affect their gait and their soundness. Having said that, Easy Goer was notoriously club-footed in one of his feet, and he was, he's in the Hall of Fame and won the Belmont in the second fastest time ever. And some people, think would have beaten Sunday Silence if they had raced against each other more times. Sunday Silence, by the way, is also a very crooked horse that nobody would buy at auction because he had such crooked legs, and that didn't stop him. All right, we're going to switch to a different conformational issue. This yearling filly, again, she's not anybody special. She is what we would call sickle hocked. So if you look at her hind legs, instead of from her hock is the point halfway down her leg that's pointing backwards. That's her hock. Typically what you would like to see, you want kind of the straightest hind leg possible. So from her hip down to her hock, down to her ankle, you want that leg to be pretty straight. This filly is sickle hocked, so her leg doesn't straighten out the way that you would like it to. Another way people say this is she stands underneath herself. As you can see, because that hind, or those hocks, don't straighten all the way up, her hind feet rest more under her body than what you would typically. Well, that's very exaggerated. Like looking at Lucky, his left hind leg there, you see how straight. Again, there's some curvature to it, but if you sort of drew a line from top down through his hock, through his ankle, he's much straighter than this filly, who is, and that again is called sickle hocked. The converse of sickle hocked is cow hocked, which this mare is a bit cow hocked. So her hocks, you can see it with the left one here, her hocks stick further out behind her, or set farther out behind her than her hindquarters there. And again, another way of saying that would be she's out behind herself. Again, these are flaws that there are, anecdotally things that would turn you off looking at them. Not in this case, they're more aesthetic, really, for the most part than anything. Certainly, some of the front end conformation is not just aesthetic. There's actual, the torque and potential for injury that we've discussed. With sickle hocked and cow hocked, it's less about injury potential and more about the fact that they would just unlikely to be as efficient moving as you would like them to be, simply because the range of motion is going to be limited and less than ideal with these two particular traits. But yeah, I mean, one of these was a yearling. This one's a brood mare. She still managed to win 2 races in almost $100,000 on the racetrack with that, being cow hocked like that, and sold as a brood mare because she was in foal to a hot stallion at the moment. People paid more than, we're willing to overlook that. And that's another one of these differences between buying a horse to race and buying a brood mare. You can overlook more things with a brood mare. Different things are important with brood mare prospects than they are with racehorses. So TK, that's sort of where I was going to get to with Conformation. I'm happy to take questions if people have some. But
I got questions for you, George.
Great.
And this one may be difficult for you, so feel free to limit it to maybe even only the mares that you've seen. But Lauren asked, which of the WVS horses do you think has the best conformation? And knowing that the racehorses, you may not have seen the vast majority in person, so that could be a little tougher to answer. But of the mares, and you've seen almost all of those.
I think I have seen all of.
Yeah. I think so.
I should have seen all of those. Super Mama probably has the best conformation. One of the things I haven't really talked about at all in any of this is size. When you go to the sales, yearling sales, especially weanling sales, everybody wants a great big horse. Not necessarily, you don't want a big, heavy, gross horse, but they want a tall horse with scope is what they would say. So that means sort of height and length of body. That's typically what you would think of a classic type horse, as opposed to a more compact, shorter, more muscular sprinter type. Super Mama is, she's big, she's correct, she's very well balanced, she has good bone. So when people say good bone, typically it's the width of their cannon bones is what they mean. Fine boned would obviously be much skinnier cannon bones. Big boned, or you talk about a horse with substance, that means there's just a lot of mass to them, but not like some of the stallions you see when you go to Kentucky, especially Claiborne, who I love. I used to work there. I idolize them. They overfeed those horses, and all of their horses look massively, sort of massively overweight. That's not what people are looking for at the yearling sales. They want a tall, scopy, strong, big boned horse. So Super Mama, I think, would probably be fit the bill there.
Yep. Question from John Lee. Up and coming broodmare sires that you like besides Munnings?
Well, first of all, I don't know that I've ever spoken to. Maybe somebody asked about Munnings as a broodmare sire. Ghost Zapper. I don't know if he counts anymore since he had the Triple Crown winner last year. Bernardini is doing very well as a broodmare sire these days. Medaglia d'Oro in Speightstown will do well. Broken Vow is a horse I like. We have a Broken Vow mare, WVS. I have one for another client. The thing about broodmare sires, the thing that makes broodmare sires typically are the quality of their mates. So Munnings is an example. Munnings is not going to be a good broodmare sire early on, most likely, because when he retired to stud, he was relatively inexpensive and did not have a lot of, wasn't going to have a ton of support from people with these incredibly well-bred mares that were going to get big sales horses, and he's now proven his worth. So if you have a daughter of Munnings from one of his later crops, he's going to make a decent broodmare sire down the road because now he's getting much better mares. Horses like Ghost Zapper, Bernardini, they retired at pretty high stud fees to good farms that got them really nice mares from great female families. So their daughters are, they're going to be out there throwing winners left and right. Curlin's going to be a good broodmare sire when the time comes for the same reasons. He's going to have gotten, great mares all along from great families. And that's typically what makes a good broodmare sire. Without weighing in on whether Secretariat was a failure as a sire or not, everybody, thinks of him now as a great broodmare sire. And that has a lot to do with the quality of the mares that were mated to him and the strength of the families behind them.
I'm going to ask a sort of a dovetail question off of John's question. And I may know the answer, but I'll for everybody else. Of the Maryland stallions, the Maryland-based stallions, because there's been a lot over the last couple of years, new ones. So there's a bunch of young stallions. Which of the young stallions which one do you think has the most potential to be a breakout stallion of the last two crops?
The last two
groups of stallions. You have new stallions that came into Maryland.
So last two being all right. So first 2-year-olds this year, Imagining and Golden Lad, Bourbon Courage are the three big ones. I think Imagining is at the top of that list as far as breakout goes. He's by Giants Causeway, who was a 3-time leading sire. He's out of a a Phipps female family that's already produced Not for Love and Polish Numbers, who were two of the best stallions in Maryland. He's got Super Saber in his family. He stood for 7,500, which no stallion in Maryland actually stands for what those stud fees are listed at. But it's still all sort of relative. So he was listed at the highest fee, even if you didn't have to pay that full price that he was listed at. When you knock it down behind the scenes, he still cost more than the other horses. He got great support. He's got plenty of runners in the pipeline. He's one that has every right to jump up and be a really top breakout type sire. Golden Lad also has a good shot. He's at Northview. He's by Medaglia d'Oro, who's one of the top sires in the country, has a son already in Violence, who's one of the up-and-coming young sires. He's at Northview, who's the best stallion farm in the state. He got plenty of mares also. They sold very well. He's certainly got a chance. Of the next bunch, Dortmund was a heck of a racehorse. Again, stood for a lot of money, didn't cover very many mares because he's the only exception to that rule about stud fees not being what they're advertised because his owner isn't from Maryland. Actually, I think he's from Virginia, but isn't familiar with the Maryland market, and so did not let them cut any deals on that stud fee. So they could have gotten more mares to that horse if they had been willing to cut deals. They were not. But as good a racehorse as he was, he could be a breakout. Having said that, he also doesn't have the same depth of pedigree as some of the others. I've been a big fan of Blofeld. He's by Quality Road, the best young sire in the country. He's from Annette Evans' female family, closely got some similarities with Roadster there. Was an undefeated 2-year-old. Went on at 4 and was a grade 2 winner at 4. We've bred a bunch of mares this year to Irish War Cry, son of Curlin, one of the top 3 stallions in the country. Very impressive physical individual, unbeaten 2-year-old, had tactical speed, was second in the Belmont. He's going to cover a big book of mares. He's also out of a Polish Numbers mare, which I think is going to give him a leg up because there's so many Not for Love mares here in Maryland, and inbreeding to the dam of Not for Love and Polish Numbers. The inbreeding of their dams not their dams. Not for Love is a nephew, but that the inbreeding there with that female family has worked. So that's something that I think is going to work also for Irish War Cry and give him a really big shot also.
Cool. All right. Well, thanks, George. Any last questions before we call it a night? We're at an hour, and it was a super session, by the way, George. Super session.
Well, I thought so too. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks everybody for coming tonight. Hopefully you enjoyed it, and as always, would love any feedback that anybody has, and we'll see you soon. Hopefully, see you in the winner's circle. Thanks, George.
Thanks, TK.